Start. Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm going to be presenting the paper, The Temporalization and Spatialization of Everyday Epistemic Resistance, a subversion of social class and caste by marginalized performing artists. My co-author, my professor, my advisor, Diana Bilimoria, is also here, which is also super exciting for me. So going straight into the paper, so this paper really begins from an earlier paper that we have been working on, where we have looked at occupational precarity as a phenomenon in the lives of marginalized performing artists in India. We looked at a particular group of performing artists called the Bauls, who are mostly in West Bengal, India, and Bangladesh. They come from lower caste Dalit families, but they we can stay on the previous slide for now. Yeah, thank you. So they come from lower caste Dalit families, but they have been renouncing their caste identities to stay out of the social hierarchy that places them in the lower caste position. And we did a study on the relationship, the employment relationships between them and their upper caste audiences, where we found that the upper caste audiences reimpose the lower caste identity on the bowels before entering into employment relationships with them so that they can reconstruct the hierarchy. And that reimposition led us to the way we understand how precarity works. And we saw that the lower caste identity is imposed through class markers like income and residential spaces and appearance and education and formal job identity. And within that structure, exploitation and commodification becomes the dominant constructs that explains their state. So we thought of reversing the lens and looking at how the artists use their agency, or are they able to use their agency to resist this imposition of caste identity. And we asked, how do lower caste artists creatively engage with identity based marginalization in their everyday employment relationships with upper caste and upper class patrons? Can we move to the next slide? And we saw that the artists do engage in everyday epistemic resistance. When we say everyday resistance, we mean the resistance that encompasses quite dispersed acts of defiance embedded in everyday life. And epistemic resistance is really the use of knowledge resources to destabilize dominant ways of knowing and finding new ways of living and understanding the world. So, firstly, we found that the Bowls they use time as a way of using their resistance in the way that subvert capitalist temporal regimes. So first, like for example, once basic sustenance is secured, performers redirect surplus resources toward communal distribution rather than personal accumulation, resisting the capitalist logic of deferred gratification and starting a moral economy that privileges the immediacy of care of others over compounding personal wealth. Second, performers allocate time towards durational care of other artists, providing shelter, money, and support to community members across months or years. So they challenge the neoliberal idea of self-sufficiency and affirm an agency of care that prioritizes endurance over individual economic gain. So in these ways, they challenge how we understand time and how we understand the maximization of time to improve our own wealth or profit in a capitalist temporal regime, and how they distribute the time given to them for more communal and more community centered ways. Can we move to the next slide? And the second thing we found was how they used space to sort of implement their everyday epistemic resistance, where they reconfigured the spaces they inhabit as a site of the resistance. They reject urban performance spaces where their art is commodified for elite consumption, and they ritualize peripheral and communal spaces such as rural fairs, bus stops, railway platforms, village squares, and natural settings, transforming them into centers of cultural production and community engagement. So, in that way, they assert an alternative geography of value that resists the dominant class and class driven spatial hierarchies where there are power differentials embedded in the spaces that we see around us. And by creating performance sites within their own homes and communal spaces, they invert the geography of power, ensuring that audiences entered the spaces where caste and class coded expectations cease to operate, and the exchange of money stems from a genuine respect for the art. Thirdly, they persistently negotiate communal spaces rendered exclusive by institutional authorities, with repeated confrontation with security personnel, arbitrary regulation in their assertion of right to occupy, perform within, and benefit from spaces that seek to render them invisible. And lastly, through mobility across geographies, performers enact a sort of spatial expansion of their self, where they challenge the gendered and classed norms of movement that would otherwise confine them to their local margins, where they would again stay in those structures of power and dominance. And finally, they use their bodies as sites of everyday resistance by foregrounding it as a site of divine presence, directly subverting caste hierarchies that have historically devalued and rendered the bodies of lower caste individuals untouchable. And they also perform barefoot in flowing patchwork robes that resist the aesthetics of refinement and material prosperity that define who belongs to a higher class and who belongs to a lower class based on cultural capital that is being assumed. So in this way, so this study really extends the understanding of everyday and epistemic resistance by examining non-confrontational, culturally embedded practices that establish an alternative epistemology through which marginalized artists make sense of their social realities. We've been seeing, we know resistance about how people use antagonistic tactics like slowing down work or absenteeism or discursive refusal. But this study really foregrounds the use of time and space, which are mobilized to construct alternative notions of value that subvert dominant epistemologies in which individual worth is determined by market productivity and spatial binaries. So in this way, it positions resistance not merely as a reactive response to oppression, which was what was coming out when we were looking at the study from the lens of commodification and precarity, but it becomes a creative process of social reconstruction through which marginalized communities generate alternative ethical and social realities, which are essentially grounded in their shared cultural values, spiritual practices, and critical collective memory. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And let's move on to the next presentation. Suprita.